Episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Michael Bratton. I go by SEC Mike on Twitter. And no, that is not Cousin Shay. That's Steven Lassan here for another live show. You can give him a follow at Athlon Steven, senior editor over there at Athlon Sports. Steven, how's it going, brother?
Man, Mike, I am so excited to be here. It is SEC After Dark. I have been like one of those players or coaches who are like saying, waiting for the big game all day. I've been waiting all day, man, to do this. So it's a pleasure to be here and to be talking some ball. I think Cousin Shane is on like secret assignment. He's like trying to figure out what's going on with the NCAA game on for PlayStation later this year.
Yeah, so hey, credit Steven. I want the audience to know this was his idea, and I think it's a great one. We're going to be giving hot seat check essentially for every SEC coach 1 through 5. So if a coach is at a 1, he's on a minimal, basically no hot seat whatsoever. If he's on a 5, his seat is scorching hot. He's probably not going to last the next 6 games. So we're going to go through it, each and every SEC coach, how we view it, and we may not view it the same. Steven's not shown me his list. I've not shown him mine. So that's going to be the show topic of today. But lots of people flooding in here, Steven. Kyle says, hey, Steven's one of my favorites. So there you go. You're already a popular.
Appreciate you, Kyle.
Yeah. So we'll get to that in just a minute, Steven. But thoughts on all this Tennessee madness? I know you said you're just like, we were shooting the shit here off air saying, man, this is generally when you cover college football and you're going day to day, several months in a row, you're like, can't wait for February to get here because things are going to slow down. They are not slowing down at all. So I know you've been kind of resting and relaxing, but I'm sure it's impossible to stay away from this Tennessee news. What's your overall thoughts on Tennessee being investigated by the NCAA for allegedly NIL inducements?
Man, they said had to have a kid. It'd be like easy, right? You have all this time to do, So yeah, no, I mean, I think you're right. It's been a crazier like end of January, start of February than I can remember. I feel like I say that every year, but I feel like it's just getting that, it's getting busier. We've had a head coach in the college football league to go to the NFL to be a coordinator. I think on the Tennessee thing specifically, there's a lot of like signals to me that college football is not necessarily broken, but also I think it's a good time for this sport to hit the reset button. And I think with the bowl games, the opt-outs, the transfers, the coaches leaving, with all the stuff around NIL, it's a good time, I think, for the sport to hit the reset button. And I think on the Tennessee thing specifically, I think the one thing that bothers me about this is trying to retroactively go back and put in penalties for things that were ambiguous seems like a really bad idea. I think we can all agree that there should be some sort of structure and some sort of like, guardrails, if you want to call it that, around the sport. This doesn't seem like a smart idea for the NCAA to really chase this to me. It seems like it's going to be another one of those cases where they spend probably a lot of time in court and probably lose again. So I guess I would say if I'm a Tennessee fan, I don't know that I'd be that worried yet.
Right. And probably by the time this all gets adjudicated, Steven, Nico will be like in his 2nd or 3rd season in the NFL. So I don't think his eligibility is going to be in question. I don't think anything is really going to come of this. I truly don't. So, but what may come of it is the NCAA is abolished essentially, or as we know it. So, I think that's a long time coming personally.
I think what's strange about this whole thing too is Tennessee and all these schools, they're a member of the NCAA. They can make the rules and they can change the rules when they want to. But as we've seen this offseason with transfer rules, or everybody's fine with it if it's not hurting your team. But when it starts hurting your team, you're not okay with it, and you're going to figure out which lawyer can get it into the courts and you can get it fought out there. But, again, I think it's a good time, I think, for college football to sort of hit the reset button. And I think where we are, we're going to some sort of different thing. Maybe it's called something College Football Association, whatever you call it, but the power structure of college football has sort of, moved around the Big Ten and the SEC, and it's going to be doing that even more so, I think, in the future. And you're probably going to get some additional structure, and it may look a little different off the field, but maybe some of that chaos goes away.
Yeah, and as John says here in the comments, never cooperate with the NCAA. I'm a Mizzou fan. So, I mean, he said it
Yeah,
well right there.
it worked out well for Tennessee the last time,
Right.
but
Well, yeah, they had to get rid of Pruitt by any
right.
means necessary. They didn't want to pay that buyout. So, pretty wild stuff. One other thing. Well, we have a couple news things real quick here, Stephen. DJ Durkin, hired by Auburn. This is official now as their defensive coordinator, replaces Ron Roberts, who went off to Florida, who's going to be a linebackers coach and I believe co-defensive coordinator down there for Billy Napier's Gator defense. But thoughts on DJ Durkin getting hired by Hugh Freeze to run the defense at Auburn? He was previously at A&M. Before that, Ole Miss. And man, he's got a backstory that we don't have to get into the full backstory here. But thoughts on Auburn making that hire?
I think it's solid. I think what kind of surprised me at the end of the year was that A&M led the SEC in conference games in fewest yards per play. That was better than Georgia and better than Alabama. Also within that, I think there were some struggles by the defense. We saw it this year, with stopping the pass was definitely an issue. The year before, it was stopping the run. They have a lot of talent. You could question whether they lived up to the potential or not. So I think it's a solid hire. I think the bigger thing for me for Auburn is the constant carousel of assistant coaches. Brought in Charles Kelly, who was the defensive coordinator at Colorado. His defense at Colorado wasn't great. Some of that was personnel. A lot of it, bringing him in, seems to be about recruiting. So is it an upgrade over Ron Roberts? I don't know. Probably not. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, because there were some fine stats for A&M, but I thought coming into the year they had the best defensive line in the entire SEC, if not maybe the country. And they had one of the best, most productive linebackers in the entire SEC. And yet defense killed them in a lot of games. Now, not all of them, but in several of them. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know why this guy keeps getting a job, Stephen, because again, he's not awful. I don't want, that's not fair, but he's not elite. He's kind of middle of the road. And maybe they just don't want to swing in. He's getting someone with SEC experience, head coaching experience. There's a lot of reasons to like it, but I think there's a lot of reasons to question it as well. I think this is maybe like a safe hire. Maybe that's the word I'm going for. When I think what they need at Auburn, and they have the potential, they have the talent. You could bring someone in there that could be the next great mind on the defensive side in the SEC, and I don't think it's going to be DJ Durkin.
I do wonder, and this is just me speculating, is if the constant carousel of assistant coaches changes at Auburn and maybe sort of the background chaos may impact some of the assistant coaches who could be interested in a job there. Also worth noting, to your point, against teams that had a winning record, A&M gave up 34 points a game this year, and that was 6 games. So in games where they were playing, you could argue, I guess, equal, comparable, better, talent, they really struggled on defense this year. So this seems like a solid hire. It doesn't seem like an upgrade over Ron Roberts to me. Maybe the combo of Kelly plus Durkin maybe helps Hugh Freeze get this defense to where it wants to be. But I didn't think defense was Auburn's biggest problem last year. So I don't know that it helps a whole lot.
Right. And then one other bit of coaching news that just dropped right before we went live, Stephen. This is kind of fascinating. But Boston College coach Jeff Hafley is leaving to become, he's the head coach of Boston College. He's leaving to become the new defensive coordinator for the Green Bay Packers. I've seen a lot of people, throw up their hands and saying, well, this is what college football is now, where these coaches are just taxed to not only obviously coaching and recruiting, but now NIL, recruiting their roster, fundraising, on and on and on. So some coaches looking for an easy way out. Right, easy, that maybe that's not the right word, but they just want more balance out of their work life. And you find that in the NFL. But this does a lot of things here, Stephen, because now all of a sudden, Liam Cohen re-enters the picture as a potential head coach candidate for Boston College. I've heard that personally, and we're seeing it on hot boards already. So again, I'm not saying Liam Cohen is gone or anything like that, but the fact that a coach left January 31st it's going to potentially start more dominoes yet again across the college landscape. And oh, by the way, former Vanderbilt receiver Jaden McGowan, as Stephen noted right before we went live, he's transferred up there. Now all these players got 30 days to hit the portal, and maybe he will end up back at South Carolina. What's your thoughts on Jeff Hatley leaving and the potential dominoes in the SEC?
I think it's another, to go back to what we talked about earlier, it's another kind of situation where college football sort of needs a reset. And especially when you see head coaches leaving to take coordinator jobs and coordinator jobs in college and in the NFL. Hafley was on the hot seat at Boston College too. So it is a sort of a unique scenario where you may be getting out ahead of being fired. But I think if you're looking, to our calendar discussion early on, now players have 30 days to enter the portal. There are some players that could be pretty hot commodities in the portal. I mean, Thomas Castellanos, their quarterback, was kind of one of the top dual threat quarterbacks. He ran for over 1,000 yards. You mentioned Jaden McGowan, Trayshawn Ward, their running back. They got a couple linemen. Linemen are always in short supply in the portal. So I think the bigger picture thing here for me is it kind of extends this calendar of chaos in college football out a little bit. And it may impact the SEC if Liam Cohen decides to be a candidate there or in the NFL, or if maybe some of these players who could enter the portal maybe decide to look into their options and come to the SEC.
And shout out Scott in the comments here. He notes, hey, Mizzou plays BC this year, third week of the season, another first-year coach that Missouri will face. So the easiest schedule in the SEC just got that much easier. You know what?
Hey, that's great news if you're a Missouri fan. Continuing that momentum from last year with a pretty favorable start to the season, and all those teams are going to be dealing with transition, plus Vanderbilt in there, who's probably going to be picked last. That's another, man, you got to be pretty excited if you're a Missouri fan.
Right. And how about this comment from Anthony? NIL stands for now I'm loaded if I'm Nico. So I do love that.
Nice.
And I did want to ask you this too, Stephen, real quick. Just because we're about to talk hot seat coaches, the rankings for all 16 now, not 14, 16 head coaches in the SEC. Which coach in the SEC could you most see pulling a Jeff Hatley here and just making that jump to the NFL, either as a head coach, as a coordinator? Any names jump out at you?
I got three. And all three of these coaches, their names have come up for NFL jobs, or they've at least been mentioned in NFL coaching circles. So Lane Kiffin, after 2024 could be a good time. Let's say Ole Miss hits it big. They make a deep run into the playoff. They're going to have to recycle the roster next season. His stock may not get much higher. Also, Brian Kelly, his name came up when he was at Notre Dame for some NFL jobs. Also, Steve Sarkisian, he's been an offensive coordinator in the NFL. What if he wins a national title? Does he want to take that chance and like Jim Harbaugh and try to win the Lombardi Trophy? So those three seem like to me the most likely options for like NFL potential.
Well, I'll throw one curveball at you, Stephen. He's only been on the job a couple weeks here, but Caleb DeBoer down at Alabama, lose one game, and he's going to be dying to get to the NFL so that these fine bob collars and all these crazy Alabama fans that now Alabama, they got fans all across, bandwagon fans all across the country. But if he loses a game, Steve, they're going to be happy to see him go. So I'm throwing Caleb DeBoer on there where maybe a couple weeks here in the South, he's like, man, I ain't ready for this. You know what?
Yeah, a guy that spent most of his coaching career in South Dakota, a little bit of time in California with Fresno State, Eastern Michigan, and Washington. Yeah, it's going to be a huge culture shock for him to come down to Alabama. Hey, something to think about. DeBoer has really bounced around quick. I mean, he was the head coach of Fresno State for just 2 years, up to Washington for 2 years. So maybe if he has success right away for 2 years, maybe he's looking to get to the NFL. We know head coaches, coordinators, head coaches who are background driven on offense often get the first call in the NFL. So who knows?
That was actually, if you recall, Stephen, kind of the knock on Saban when he got that job was, well, he never lasts anywhere long, 3 or 4 years. Yeah. And people like me, we were waiting for him to make that next move. And he's just said, no, for 17 years, I'm going to dominate y'all. So
yeah.
All right, so Stephen, hot seat check for every SEC coach. And again, we're going to do this a little different. If you're a 1, that means virtually no hot seat whatsoever. You're safe. Of course, we all know, Stephen, in the SEC, you'll lose a game or two. Things could change in a real hurry here. So a 1 is virtually no hot seat. 5 is scorching hot. And instead of just going strictly in alphabetical order through the teams like we often do, I thought it'd be fun, Stephen, if we just start with the coaches that you and I each have listed as a 1. So virtually no hot seat heading into 2024. How's that sound?
That sounds great, man. I kind of did the same thing with my 1 through 5. Within the 1 through 5, I think there is sort of like a pressure element that's not necessarily hot seat driven. Like, how are you judging Lane Kiffin and Brian Kelly after, Brian Kelly maybe didn't quite meet expectations last season? What do you do with Lane Kiffin, considering the pressure on him this season? So I'm curious to see where you have those. Also, I did like a 4 grade for me is like getting warm. It's like approaching the hot seat. So I think if you're a 4 or 5 in this list, you're in danger. Anything else, you're in good shape.
All right, so I'm going to go first here, Stephen, because I just think this one is so obvious. But Kirby Smart at Georgia, I mean, he's there as long as he wants to be. He's the best coach in the country. He's the most accomplished coach now, I guess you could say, with 2 national championships, nearly a third, and he's got several probably upcoming, as long as he stays in Athens and continues to recruit to the level he is. You have to agree, Kirby is a 1.
You don't have him as a 5? They didn't win the national championship last year, Mike. No, it's definitely a 1 for me. If freezing cold, if we could do negative 1 or 2, he would get that. Best coach in college football, the favorite to win it all, lost 2 games in the last 3 years, and both were to Alabama, and no regular season losses within the SEC in that span. So he's easily a 1 for me.
All right, who else? I'll let you go this time, Stephen. Who else do you just give us one that you have listed as a 1?
Go Jeff Lebby at Mississippi State. It's kind of an easy one. A new coach taking over a situation in a program that's going to need some time, I think, to rebuild things. And I think given the circumstances of last season, I think Lebby's going to have a long leadway to have some success there. So a lot of question marks, but I like the track record on offense. We know Dan Mullen, Mike Leach did very well there. So I like I hate to use the word fit, but I think as a first-year coach, he should be given plenty of time so he's not on the hot seat. And that's why he's a 1 for me.
Yeah, and I agree with everything you said, but I would ask you this, Stephen. And again, people just think we question these coaches, we hate them, essentially. But what do we need to see from Lebby, and how quickly can that 1 turn to a 2 this season? What does he need to avoid his first season? I'm going to throw up the schedule here, but I have to imagine, outside of Arizona State, which is week 2, which is still I'm not saying they can't win that, but if you win the other, I think 3 of the 4 non-conference, you have to win those, and try to steal a couple of SEC games to stay on that 1 level. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Mike, I would agree with you there. I think, first of all, when you look at that non-conference schedule, I think they should be favored in 3 of those 4 games. The one against Arizona State's a little tricky because Arizona State's going to be picked probably middle to the back half of the Big 12, but they should be able to win 3 of those 4. So I think avoiding a bad loss in that stretch. Also, I mean, that October 26th game against Arkansas, they beat Arkansas last year. So I think ideally, if you're Jeff Lebby, if you're trying to build some momentum, beating Arkansas again this year, you get them at your place. So I think 4 wins, 5. I mean, 5. If you could talk in 6 wins for Jeff Lebby in year 1, I think he exceeds expectations. I think if they lose Toledo, if they lose to UMass, then I think it goes from 1 to a 3 in a hurry real quick.
Yeah. Well, I'll go, and Kyle's already alluded to it here in the comments, but I would say Mike Elko has also got to be a 1 for a lot of the same reasons. He's first-year coach. We're crazy in the SEC, Steve, but we're not that crazy. We don't run people off before they coach a game, although people have been run off off the field for before that first game, and it can turn in a hurry. I mean, there was people fired up for the Chad Morris era until they actually saw that guy coach. But I just think, given his track record at Duke, given his track record previously at A&M, they'll even give him some time. I'm gonna throw up the Aggie schedule. It's tough, particularly right out the gate, because we got Notre Dame, which projects as a top 15, top 10 team. First SEC game is at Florida, which that's winnable. But again, that ain't easy for a first-year coach. It's an incredibly tough environment early in the season in the swamp. So things potentially could start rough, but he'd still be fine because we got confidence in the coaching staff he's developed and the early moves he's already made in the transfer portal to kind of shore up that roster. I think the Aggies are going to be just fine under Mike Elko. So given that he's not even coached a game there as a head coach, outstanding defensive coordinator there, I have to put him at a 1.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've got him at 1 as well. A couple of things here about Mike Elko that I like. When you and I were talking about what the best fits for this Texas A&M job, Mike Elko, it doesn't seem like he's going to be getting like national championship trophies printed before they even, coach a game with a blank year on it. He's just going to do the work. And I think he's already kind of alluded to that, the work in the portal. I think just quietly kind of going about his business, trying to figure out and trying to get this program to meet expectations. They have all these resources, great facilities, and the talent. Can they meet those expectations? And so when you look at the job that he did at Duke was one of the worst Power 5 teams in the year before he got there. They were drastically better the next season. And then the year after, hard to judge progress because they lost their starting quarterback early in the season. So I think his track record, new coach, popularity from being a good coordinator there before, long runway for me. So he's a 1 here.
And then Cousin Shane, I appreciate the question and the view here, Shane. They were so patient with Jimbo Fisher. They gave him too much time. And we all know that was partly due to the contract. But Jimbo's longevity, will A&M fans be as patient with Mike Elko? That's what Cousin Shane wants to know.
Man, that's a good question. I think Elko will get a little bit more patience than Fisher. Fisher had that 2020 season where they got so close to the playoff, and there was some early, like those first 3 years, there was some early momentum, but things spiraled pretty quick after that. I don't know. I mean, I think his popularity, I think as a coordinator, and also I think maybe his personality might be a little bit more kinder, a little gentler. So I think they'll give him a little bit more time. Don't you think?
I do. And I think also it helps him that while, again, this is the SEC, we're all crazy down here. We have expectations for A&M, but they're not going to enter the season with people like me, people like Cousin Shane, picking them in the top 10, picking them. I realize there's no SEC West anymore, but picking them to win the West. It's almost like we're looking at A&M saying they could be really good, but we're not throwing unrealistic expectations. Not yet. That'll be in 2025. We probably will be, though. You know what?
They have a chance to be sneaky this year. I think a couple weeks ago, I did my top 25 kind of before the draft deadline, before signing day. And I suspect A&M's probably going to sneak into that 20 to 25 range now. So I think they got a chance to be solid this year. I mean, I know that you mentioned their schedule, but if Connor Wigman is as good as we think he can be, and Mike Elko does good work on the defensive side, I think they're going to be sneaky this year.
All right, who else do you have rated as a 1? And again, if you're joining late, 1 means virtually no hot seat whatsoever.
I've got Eli Drinkowitz as a 1.
Ooh.
I think it's funny because if we did this exercise last season, he probably would have been maybe a 3 or a 4 on the hot seat scale. But what a difference a year makes. 11 wins, one of the best seasons in school history recently, beating Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl. I think we now have a better idea of where this program is. The 3 losing seasons to start, but now they sort of have found their stride as we go into 2024. Love the momentum on the recruiting trail, transfer portal, and all that. Really, the only question for me is how can they sustain it? And I think that's what we'll find out this season.
Interesting. I don't have Drink as a 1, so we'll get to him in a minute here, but I'll go next on my 1. This is going to shock some of these people, Steve. This is going to absolutely blow them away because they think I hate this man. Just because I said He's not the elite of the elite, not yet, but he's on his way. I got Steve Sarkisian as a one. Just spurned Alabama. Now, I don't know if they really offered him the job, but you have to assume they gave him a call. But all the momentum he's got the quarterback now, and he's got the backup quarterback. They're throwing all the resources towards Steve Sarkisian. He finally got them every year, Stephen. They're picked, as one of the favorites to win the Big 12. They didn't do it for over a decade. They got it done. So we're going into a new conference. It ain't going to be a gimme by any means, but I think Steve Sarkisian is on one of the coolest seats in the SEC, even though he's not coached a game. Now, that could change. That could change in a season here, but I got Steve Sarkisian at a 1. What's your thoughts on that?
I've got him as a 1 as well for some of the reasons that you mentioned. The trend line, 5 wins to 8 to 12, and the college football playoff. So I think the trend line at Texas is good. I know the Texas is back has been a meme for several years, and I don't want to say that they're sort of back because they have to go improve it for the next couple of seasons. But I think you have to like the trend line. You have to like the fact they were a couple plays away from going to the national championship. They went into Tuscaloosa and got the big victory this year. So it feels like the foundation of the program is strong moving to the SEC. And Sarkisian's recruiting, program building, maybe being in Nick Saban's sort of system for a couple of years help with that. I know high expectations have not worked out for Texas before, but it feels like they can do that better. They're better positioned to now. And certainly I think with the change at Alabama, LSU having some questions coming into the season, they feel equipped to be very strong this year again. So I've got Sarkisian at 1 as well.
Now, I just went, so I'll let you go, Stephen, but just a heads up, I only have one other coach as a 1. I don't know how many more you've got, but who else you got on a 1, if you have anybody?
That's actually the last of my ones was Steve Sarkisian.
Oh, interesting. So I've got Lane Kiffin also as a 1. Now, everything he's accomplished, first 11-win season in Ole Miss history, for the only coach to win 10 games in the regular season. He's done it twice now in Oxford. The Portal King. Now, maybe he's one tweet away from losing his job, but I kid when I say that. But no, I think the direction of the program. Now they gotta live up to the hype. If they come out here and have 8-4, they're not going to run him off. But I mean, I think some of this, this goodwill he has will be lost. And it's funny, Stephen. I mean, we forget. I remember because I just am so inundated with this stuff. But I mean, there was a lot of people, Stephen, that were mad as hell at Lane Kiffin after he lost to Alabama. And they said, what in the hell, this coach, they basically put that on him. Running his mouth, everything he did to troll Alabama. And then they come out here and they drop a damn egg, and they had not looked good the entire season. Now they caught fire, and that's all people remember. That's all that really matters. But there was some serious questions. There was people in the Ole Miss media saying, well, you know what his record is against teams that finished 500? It's awful, or at least it was. So then he beats LSU, and we turn the page on that. But that will happen again if they come out here and throw up an 8-4 with this roster. This is a playoff roster. Now they got to finish the deal.
So I have Lane Kiffin at a 2. And I think one of the comments said that Lane Kiffin is safe. And I would agree with that. Here's why I got him at 2, though. It's because of what Mike said. I think it's because of the pressure on 2024. So I'm sort of building in some expectation-driven pressure for this season that everything for this team says it's all about the playoff. Ole Miss has gone heavy into the portal to improve their defense. They've hired Pete Golding last season to get the defense back on track. With everybody coming back pretty much for Ole Miss offensively, the improvement on defense, the expectation is the playoff. So I bumped up Kiffin. It's not a hot seat thing. It's just most of an expectation thing for this year as they try to maximize this opportunity in 2024.
Interesting. Okay, so you've got no more 1s. So now we're in the hot seat 2s, and you already hit on Drink. So I'll go there. I have him as a 2. So again, not far from a 1. He's done an outstanding job. not questioning that, but I am kind of questioning, can he do it again? And I mean, he's a 500 coach till last year. Now, who cares if they just keep winning big? And again, if you look at their schedule, I mean, they are going to be favored in 9 games, if not 10. and I mean, coaches get leaving right, in the middle of the off season that they're faced. Yeah, A&M's going to be a big one. If they win A&M, they're probably going to win 10, 11 games. And they probably should beat A&M. Now, if it was in Columbia, I'd have a lot more confidence in saying they're going to beat A&M. Alabama, of course, people are burying Alabama. I don't think that's right, but it looks easier now without Nick Saban. That Oklahoma game looms large. But again, can he do it 2 years in a row? Can they recapture the momentum? I'm not doubting that he can, but if they do that again, they put up another 10-2, 11-1 type season. Eli skyrockets into the one for me, but I just got to see a little bit more.
I think what happened last season for Missouri is sort of a pick your path for Missouri and Eli Drinkwitz, because like if you think about this, if you go look at the first 3 years, and you could say that they were building to this point. Like it took time to go out and hire the right coordinators. It took time to go out and find the right pieces on the recruiting show. But when they hit. They hit for the 11-win season. You could also look at it. It's the outlier right now at Missouri. He's been there 4 years, and the other one's seasons were just not great, and they've had an 11-win season. So there is a little bit of unknown for me going into the season, but I think that schedule plus the returning personnel offers a lot of opportunity for Drinkwitz to continue that momentum.
And then how about this comment from Cousin Shane, Steven? He says, who's under more pressure, Lane Kiffin in 2024 or my leather belt at Golden Corral? Oh my God. I appreciate it. All right. All right. I went drink. Who else is on your tier 2 there, Steven?
I've got Kalen DeBoer at Alabama as a 2. Normally, I would put a new coach in the tier of 1, but I think with the expectation at Alabama, you are following the greatest coach in college football history. The expectation is going to be you have to make the playoff, and you probably have to make a run in the playoff. And that's putting aside all the personnel questions coming into this season. Just think the first time that Kalen DeBoer loses a game, we know what's going to happen is that he hasn't spent any time here. He doesn't understand the SEC. So
yep.
That's why I've got him as a 2. It's a little bit of a different situation for a first-year coach.
Yeah, everything you just said, Stephen, that's where I've got DeBoer 2 as well. And you may sit here and say, well, that's not fair. Jeff Lebby and Elko, first-year coaches, are at 1, but it's championship or bust down there, and it should be with the roster he has. It's better than any roster, even with the defections, better than any roster he's ever had. Now, the climb to get there is also going to be more difficult, but if he is this elite of a coach, they're going to make the college football playoff. They should be a national championship contender. I don't care who they've lost. And to your point, they play Georgia. That's their first SEC game.
Welcome to the SEC, Kalen DeBoer. Right?
You get them at home, and Alabama fans, they don't give a damn about Kirby in Georgia. They expect to win that game. And even if that game's in Athens, they probably expect to win it with Nick Saban as their head coach. Obviously not Nick Saban anymore, but the expectation is the same. I'm trying to look. Georgia, they'll be an underdog probably. That may be it. At LSU, maybe. The expectation's still got to be 9, 10, 11 wins season here. So, if they go 8-4, that's crazy to say, Stephen, but I would skyrocket him up to a much hotter seat if they lose 4 games this year.
I totally agree with you. I think looking at that schedule, the LSU game and maybe the Tennessee game, I think depending on how Alabama looks, depending on how Tennessee looks, to see where the line is this season. But Kalen DeBoer has been incredibly successful everywhere he's been as a coordinator and as a head coach. But man, the pressure of taking over for the greatest coach of all time and one that has led this program to national championships and being in national championship contention every year is just a different beast. So that's why the expectation is just the pressure is a little bit higher than other first-year coaches.
Right. All right. So another number 2 I have here, Stephen. I've got Josh Heupel at Tennessee. Now, maybe the NCAA would disagree with that, but again, we got to remember, just like Drink, who, well, I guess you could swing it both ways. You could say, well, Heupel really only had one great season at Tennessee, but I mean, last year winning 9 games, that was not awful by any means. But I think by any measure, he probably would have been a 1 last year, and I think Tennessee, as crazy as it sounds, Stephen, they disappointed in many regards, yet they still won 9 games. So I don't think he's anywhere close to any kind of hot seat, but I think he needs to have another 10-win season if we're going to elevate him to the 1 standard. And if Nico, NCAA be damned, if he lives up to the hype, they're going to do that many times. They're probably going to make the playoff every year as long as Nico is there and Josh Heupel's the head coach, if Nico lives up to the hype with the talent they have around him. So again, if they could beat Alabama or Georgia, I mean, he's got to win these big games. Can't be losing to Florida. Otherwise, I may drop his ass to a 3. But I think I'm pretty firm on Josh Heupel being a 2 right here.
I have him as a 2 as well. And for a lot of reasons that you mentioned, I think, first of all, you want to talk about the positives for Josh Heupel. Took over at a time where Tennessee football was kind of been in chaos a little bit, and certainly has been over the last couple tenures. Much more stability at the program now. One of the best offenses in the country, and they beat Alabama. So I think a lot of positives so far. You could argue that the offense this year was the worst that it's probably going to be, and they still found a way to win 9 games. I think then the couple questions I have is, number 1, can they continue to get better on defense? That's the statistics looked good if you went just by overall. I think within the SEC, those numbers dropped a little bit. You'd like to see that group get a little bit better this season. And then can they close the gap to Georgia? The last couple games to Georgia really haven't been close. That's the standard in the SEC. That's the standard in college football. That's where I need to see Heupel kind of close the gap. But I got him as a 2 as well.
All right. Any other 2s on your list here, Stephen?
I've got Brent Venables from Oklahoma. I think the progress from last season to this season, from 2022 to 2023, going from 6 wins to 10 wins, also defensive improvement, sort of the same argument I would look at with Sarkisian. It feels like Oklahoma has a coach who understands the importance of defense and line of scrimmage as you move into the SEC, and the program's on some pretty, I think, stable ground in terms of recruiting and everything else as you shift into the SEC. So I've got Brent Venables as a 2.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. That's where I got him. Huge strides last season. Of course, obviously in the Big 12, so we got to see that translate to the SEC. But the only thing that would cause me any kind of hesitation here, Stephen, and I don't think these were bad hires. I think they potentially upgraded, maybe not across the board, but specifically at defensive coordinator, with both coordinators being changed. And a lot of these coaches, particularly first-time head coaches, you're kind of judged, and I think of like Sam Pittman, when they lost Bryles and Odom. I mean, clearly there was a downgrade there. So, again, I'm not saying Venables downgraded. I don't think he did at all. I think he upgraded at defensive coordinator, and I think at offensive coordinator, he may have even upgraded there as well, because we still don't know a ton about Jeff Lebby as the play caller, given his track record of working with Kiffin and Heupel and others. So, but that is a big question mark. Competition is a question mark, and I'm not a huge fan of what I'm hearing in regards to his status on NIL. But maybe Oklahoma's the only SEC team that doesn't get punished, and maybe Brent Venables is a damn genius when it comes to NIL.
I like the hire of Zach Alley as defensive coordinator for Oklahoma, because I think it's also part of Venables' understanding that you're moving into a tougher conference, and this is also part of the broader conversation in college football. there is more of a GM oversight responsibility you have now as a head coach. And so you're hiring someone, kind of almost one of your coaching disciples, to be your defensive coordinator, who's done great work as an assistant. And he was also great at Jacksonville State, to come in and sort of take over your defense. That frees you up more time to be a head coach, to focus on recruiting, NIL, and transfers. So I think Venables he's just in his third year. He's just figuring out how to be a head coach. So I think his moves so far have made a lot of sense to me. And honestly, Alley's a big upgrade over Ted Roof. I think Latrell Levy might just be a wash. Like, it might just be about even on that move.
How about this comment from a perfect cracker? What a name. But best comment of the night so far. He says, I'm 50 and I've only seen Oklahoma fire one coach. Who I have no idea who that even is, Stephen. Do you, off the top of your head, do you know who that one coach would be?
Believe John Blake, I believe.
Ooh, that's why we call you the college football encyclopedia right there, Stephen.
I think one point, Oklahoma, they have been like recession proof. You look at just the history of Oklahoma, just consistent winning seasons. I mean, Howard Schnellenberger didn't quite work out at Oklahoma. John Blake didn't work out, but I mean, look recently. I mean, Bob Stoops, the other guy that followed Bob Stoops, I won't mention him for Oklahoma's fans' sake, and of course Brent Venables now.
Right. Yeah, man, that's amazing to think about. And I appreciate you, Aaron. He gave us $5. So DeBoer on the hot seat in year one. Certainly not saying that he is today. I think he's going to be a hell of a hire. I've said it before. I think he's going to win a national championship or two at Alabama. But I will be the first to change my tune, Stephen, if he drops a couple of games here. So I think he can find himself on the hot seat. Not on the hot seat now, but he can find himself on the hot seat in year one. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Bad losses to games that Alabama should win would probably inch his way to the hot seat. I certainly think, like, barring some sort of like 3-9, 4-8 disaster, Kalen DeBoer is not going to go anywhere. But I do think, like, to your point, like, if you start losing games, the expectation is what? 11-1, 10-2 college football playoff, to be able to win some games, even with a roster that has got some question marks and is in transition. You lose a couple games where you were favored to, or that Nick Saban didn't. The first time those happen, he'll coach his way onto the hot seat. I'm pretty optimistic, though, about his future there at Alabama, though.
Right. And I think the best way to boil this down, and this may not be fair, and I hate when people Stephen, never in my life that I do people doing the preseason, and I know this is part of your business, so I'm not calling you out specifically, but I never did the 4 playoff projections, because I think that kind of, what you're saying there is you're basically saying, to hell with the rest of the sport. What matters is the Final Four, and I know you don't think that way. You got to do what you got to do, but I just never did that. And I hate that I think it's just going to be worse. It's going to be just the 12 that we're going to care about. But the point that I'm struggling to make here, Stephen, I think if Alabama misses a 12-team playoff, I don't care who the coach is, whether it's DeBoer or Kiffin or Sarkisian or whatever. As soon as you miss that 12-team playoff, after what Nick Saban did for 17 years, you're on the hot seat. And if you miss it twice, you're gone. I don't think they're going to put up with that unless the program just completely falls off the rails.
Yeah. I think one of Nick Saban's one of the many things that he did well was sort of the infrastructure, keeping everybody aligned as far as, I know he wasn't necessarily crazy about the NIL thing, but, one of the reasons that Alabama turned a corner when Nick Saban got there was got everybody on the same page, said this is my way is the way we're going to do it, and this is how we're going to win. And of course, it paid off. The results started to show shortly after that. So I think that's the challenge for DeBoer, is that when you take over for a legend like this, your runway time is a lot shorter. So any kind of loss, whether it's 2 in a row to Tennessee, going to LSU and losing, all those, the expectation is still the college football playoff, despite the turnover in personnel this year.
Right. Now, how about, we've not mentioned this guy, I don't believe, Stephen. I've got him all as a 2, Brian Kelly down at LSU. And again, he's outstanding. I'm not questioning him. Probably LSU fans probably wondering, what the heck? This guy's won 20 games here in 2 years. How could he not be a 1? Well, I'll tell you right here, Stephen. I mean, you win the division year one. You take a slight step back year two, even though you won, your quarterback won the Heisman. But where I'm again questioning, and much like these other coaches, Stephen, replacing both coordinators, and we just get into this habit where when you get your new coordinators, people just assume that you've upgraded. And even if, you hire two big names, we've upgraded. That it doesn't always work that way. So again, I think Brian Kelly can, not that he's anywhere close to the hot seat, but if they take another step back, if he has struck out on any of these coordinators to the level he did with Matt House, I think he could find himself trending towards that hot seat. He said it himself, Stephen. I came down here to win national championship. We have not sniffed that, even though we did win the West year one. If we are even further from that year three, I think we're going to have some serious questions that a lot of these Notre Dame fans will be saying, we told you, this man can't win the big game. Not that I necessarily agree with that, but that's going to get louder and louder.
And even it's in a spot where the SEC is in a weird time too, with Alabama, with Nick Saban retiring, you have Texas and Oklahoma coming into the league. If you fall behind those teams, that's going to be another problem for Brian Kelly. Another thing is too, how many coaches would get the opportunity to buy out, a couple $1 million in defensive personnel twice? You probably do it once. Don't know that you could do it twice. So while I love this defensive staff, getting Blake Baker, going out and getting Bo Davis and the other guys they brought in, they've significantly upgraded the defensive staff. But also I think that's sort of speaks to the urgency for LSU. Les Miles and Ed Orgeron won national championships. Brian Kelly is a much better coach than both of them. The expectation should be to win a national championship. So they have a much better defensive staff. The offensive side of the ball, Joe Sloan, everybody raves about him, kind of a rising star behind the scenes. So I'm interested to see how that transition works. But the personnel, I think, still in place to have one of the better offenses in the SEC. I had him as a 2 as well. I kind of debated putting him at 3 just for not necessarily the hot seat, but the pressure that's going to be on this team this year to get into that contention for a spot in the SEC championship. Because I thought last season, I wouldn't say totally disappointing, but it was, I think, I thought maybe this team had a chance to be a top, 8 type of team this year. And I think they sort of didn't meet those expectations.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. So I've got one more coach at a 2, Stephen. Do you have any more at the 2 level?
I had Mark Stoops. I debated 2 or 3, and I was really curious to see where you fell on this one, just to kind of figure out where Mark Stoops is in the scope of the SEC. But I settled on 2. I just think winning as coach at Kentucky, certainly I think fair to wonder about whether or not he's hit the ceiling there at Kentucky. Can he get back to the 10-win seasons that we've seen? 2 double-digit win seasons, only 4 in Kentucky history. 2 of those have happened under Mark Stoops. I don't think he's any danger of being fired, but it will be interesting to see after the A&M deal. It's a little awkward. Kind of how does Kentucky respond going forward? I'd be curious to see.
Right. Well, Stephen, I've said it many, many times. I will continue to say it until he proves me wrong. He's a C average coach. So he's got an average hot seat. I got him at a 3. I'll get to more of him in just a second. The final 2 I've got, and maybe this is not fair because they've not done very well at all, but this is more about where he's coaching and the expectations. I got Clark Lee at a 2 just because, again, things went poorly. Clearly, last season we took a huge step back when it looked like we were going. Like we took 1 step forward 2 years ago. We took about 5 steps back this year. But following the mass exodus of the roster, I wonder, Stephen, how much of that is all that was NIL related, and I don't know. It ain't good. But I just think I don't know. I don't know the commitment. I don't know if it's there. Although they have made some strides to show their commitment to improving the football program. I don't think it's anywhere where it needs to be, and they're in the wrong conference to have this kind of level of commitment and lack of support. But it is what it is. And I think Clark Lee could go 3 more years like he just had before they fire him.
Mike, I've got him as a 4, so you can feel free to call me crazy here. I certainly, it's a hard job. There's no doubt about it. Some patience is definitely needed. They are 1 season removed from being 5-7. So it's fair to wonder maybe if a 4 is too harsh here, but they have 2 0-8 seasons in the SEC out of his 3 years. And I do think anytime that when I watch first year coaches after Clark Lee took the job, there was some early momentum, and then they had that season where they were 5-7, and it kind of feels like they've lost a lot of that. And now you go through an off season where you lost some of your top players to the portal. 0-8, I don't think would sit well at all. Now, to your point, I think it's fair to wonder what the level of patience is versus making a move at a place like Vanderbilt. I love the offseason moves to get Jerry Kill as an off-field assistant. They've upgraded the staff, I think, too. So there are some positive things here. I just don't, if I'm Vanderbilt, if you go 0-8 again in the SEC and you're woefully uncompetitive, with Texas and Oklahoma coming in, can you afford to fall too much further behind? So maybe I'm too harsh on Clark Lee.
I think you are, Steven. I didn't realize you hated old Clark Lee, but hey, that's fair. I mean, the fair points. I think the standard, and it's sad that I even have to say that, but I just think the standard is different there. So we'll get into tier 3, Steve. That's, again, where I had Mark Stoops. Again, this doesn't mean he's awful or anything, but, I mean, had they not beaten Louisville, and I get it, we can sit here and what if this game, that game for all these coaches, but had they lost that, man, I don't know. I think he would be on an even hotter seat, given his comments with the NIL about how, people got to pony up so we can compete and all this. And I don't know, Stephen. They lost the bowl game, winnable bowl game, the situation with A&M. Again, he's not a bad coach. He's not a great coach. He's right there in the middle. But he is, like, to your point, he's the winningest coach in Kentucky history. He stays there another year, he's probably going to be the losingest coach in Kentucky history too. So I don't know what to do with Stoops, but if it's certainly, to your point, it feels like we've hit a ceiling. And not only have we hit a ceiling, it seems like we have taken a step back, if that makes sense.
It would worry me, I think, if I'm Kentucky, and I know we don't have divisions this year in the SEC, but Missouri just shot up to the top 10 and just had the 11-win season. You also have Tennessee, which the last couple of years has been, better under Josh Heupel. Are things getting stale at Kentucky? I think it's a fair question. So I think, to your point and the kind of discussion I think we'll find out in 2024 is, have they hit a ceiling and can they go beyond 7 wins? The SEC is only getting tougher. And when you look at last year's wins for Kentucky, that Florida win was huge. The Louisville win was huge. But the close call against Eastern Kentucky, a win over Akron, not exactly the greatest of wins for Kentucky. So I think some questions about overall direction, but he still is the winningest coach. And also the same, I think, debate that we had with Clark Lee works here for Mark Stoops too. Like, what's the fair level of expectation?
Right. I think we could just as easily say, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Kentucky, Stephen, but if, let's say, for some reason Stoops left or Stoops got fired, which I don't think he should get fired by any means, but if that were to happen, I mean, in 2 or 3 years, could they not be where Vanderbilt is? Maybe not to that level, but I mean, close to where, I mean, it could get a lot worse. I have seen Kentucky be awful at football, and they are not awful. They're a tough out. Hell, I know Billy Napier hopes he'd get run off. You know what I mean? Like, there's certain games they show up for. So again, maybe I'm being unfair to them, but I don't know. I'm just kind of, I just don't. They're steady. I guess steady is the word, but that's not what I want to see. I want to see a breakout. I want to see a playoff run, and maybe that's asking too much. But I think he's been there long enough to where we could see something like that.
I think Mark Stoops is probably just waiting for that Iowa job to come open, and he can make his exit up to up to Iowa. So I mean, we go back to kind of some of the things that we talk about here. I mean, there is a sort of be careful what you wish for if you're Kentucky. Like it is good to have a steady winning 7-8 win seasons. But it's also fair, I think, to ask like, what is the plan to go beyond that? What's the plan to do what Missouri did this year and what Tennessee has been able to do under Josh Heupel? So it can get worse, but I also think if I was Kentucky, I would also be wondering too, like, hey, is it fair to say how do we do what they're doing, considering that Heupel and Drinkowitz have been there for shorter time?
Yeah, and Jerry, great point. Y'all don't love Kentucky, but y'all love their bourbon. That is true. I actually like the Mark Stoops bourbon. Is quite excellent. All right, so Steve, we're in the threes. Again, I got Stoops 3. You do not. You got him as a 2. But any other coaches that you have at that 3, so which is kind of like a medium hot seat range?
I've got 2 coaches in the 3 range. One of them, and I guess I'll kind of throw both of them out there. I think Hugh Freeze of Auburn and Shane Beamer of South Carolina. I don't think Shane Beamer's on the hot seat, but I think this is more about program direction. You know, coming into this season, last season was a lot of injuries, a tough schedule, falling just short of a bowl game. I think they could easily get back to, 6-7 wins this year. Of course, we've talked a lot about the quarterback situation this offseason. If that hits, they've got a chance to get back in there. So I think this is kind of about direction after a year where there were some high expectations coming into the season. A lot of things didn't work in their favor. They fell just short. Auburn under Hugh Freeze is just really interesting. They've had a fascinating offseason overall with the coaching staff changes, what they've been able to do in the portal and on the recruiting trail. Is Hugh Freeze taking back play calling duties? Is he not? There's just a lot of questions here with Auburn. And I think you could look at the good for Auburn beating Alabama, or coming close to beating Alabama, coming close to beating Georgia, but at the end of the season, getting blown out by New Mexico State and getting blown out by Maryland. So I think fair to wonder that early momentum sort of proof of concept we talk about with new coaches. I think it's fair to wonder, how fast could that fade out if things don't go well this year for him?
Yeah, interestingly, Stephen, I have the exact same thing. Hugh Freeze and Shane Beamer both at 3. I like a lot of the points you made. I think Hugh. I mean. I think it could go one of 2 ways, Stephen. I think they could take a big leap forward, and we're sitting here saying, all right, that's what we thought we were getting last year, with Hugh Freeze coming to the Plains. I mean, it's not often a coach gets hired and he's calling out Nick Saban in his presser.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like usually they bow to that guy at least, they want to come. They don't want to be seen coming, so to speak. But it was not that way for Hugh. Of course, he nearly knocked him off. But tough losses, ugly losses, questionable coaching, questionable culture. And this is within the coaching staff even. So, it seems like, and Hugh is no stranger to shenanigans of his own, obviously. So I'm not saying any of that's going on at Auburn right now, but he could lose it on the field. He could lose it off the field. I think even, and in years past, Stephen, I would have said, this is genius. They got a top 10 recruiting class. They're going to be fine. Well, in portal, in NIL world, I don't think that matters, Stephen, because as crazy as it sounds, just signed a top 10 class, some elite 5 stars and 4 stars. If they win 5 games next year, who knows how many of those guys are going to be there? They'll all hit the portal potentially. So I don't know that can save you either. So I don't know what the world to make of Hugh Freeze, but I'm concerned. I'll just say that. Whereas Beamer, I like Beamer a lot better than most people seemingly do, and I'm not saying that you don't like him or anything like that, but I agree with you. I mean, we did a little bit of a backslide here. We didn't make a bowl game, came close, but nobody cares about close unless we're playing hand grenades here. And Shane Beamer, again, it seems like we had Spencer Rattler, we had Xavier Legette, and then what else did we have last year? I mean, it's almost like in year three, you think we'd be taking major strides forward. And there, to your point, there was a lot of injuries and things of that nature. But I want to see him get back to that. I want him to see a lot more competitive, pulling some upsets. And if they have a good year, if they win, 8 games, something like that, he is firmly back to probably a 2 or something like that. So I think he has that in him. But I also think things can go the other way if they disappoint and they get blown out, and some of these young players are not ready for prime time.
Yeah, it feels like critical year is such a basic term for both of these coaches, but it really does feel like both these guys are in critical years. Because to your point on Auburn, you think about how many players transferred from Alabama, how many players transferred from Georgia, and those were winning a lot of games. Now Alabama had a coaching change, so any top 10 class could erode quickly based upon how a season goes, somebody else's NIL, success on the field by another program. I think on Beamer's point, I mean, this is the same question I think with Kentucky and Vanderbilt is like this is kind of a harder job. It's not as hard, I think, as obviously as Vanderbilt is, but like, what's the level of patience? Like, what should be the level of expectation? They've had some bad luck with injuries and just a brutal schedule, but I do think from a direction standpoint, they've had the recruiting class come in this year with some guys who can help, guys that are closer to the ball on the line of scrimmage, which they've needed. So if you can get some impact from them, you can sort of get back to a bowl game this year. There's a chance to turn this momentum quickly around. And I go back to proof of concept because it's so important. That end of season in 2022 where they beat Tennessee, they beat Clemson. There was that positive momentum going there. So I think it's important to kind of recapture that if you're South Carolina and Shane Beamer.
Right. And appreciate you, Jared. He just gave us a $5 donation. Cousin Shane had a great question, Stephen. And, it's not this simple, but does quarterback play for Auburn? Does that make or break Hugh Freeze and his longevity there on the Plains? Because, again, Peyton Thorne, he had his moments, particularly Alabama and Georgia. Maybe that's critical to why they nearly knocked those teams off. But if they do not get better quarterback play, I guess is the real question is, will Hugh Freeze last? Because I know they signed a touted high schooler, but how soon will he be ready? Will he be ready as a redshirt freshman in 2 years? Well, I would think they'd have to go to the portal at that point. But will quarterback play make or break Hugh? What's your thoughts on that?
I'm surprised that Auburn didn't land a quarterback in the portal so far. Now, maybe they go out and get one at the end of spring, but I think if the reporting on this is true, it does sound like there was some increased urgency around the quarterback position after the Music City Bowl because of how poorly that game went for Auburn. I think it's fair to wonder, like, what is the ceiling too for Peyton Thorne? He was I wouldn't say average quarterback in the Big Ten, but can he be all SEC? Or was what you got last year plus a little bit what you're going to get out of him this year? So, yeah, I think to Cousin Shane's point, I think quarterback play is going to be super crucial for Auburn this year to try and take a step forward. But we also saw this year, I know they're high on the incoming receivers, and there's some optimism that, hey, improved receiver play is going to help the quarterback. Still think that the guy throwing the ball is a big question, even if your receivers are better. So there's a lot of questions to me that Auburn offense this season.
Mm-hmm. And then, so I don't have any other coach on a 3 level. Do you?
I do not. It was just Freeze and Beamer.
Okay, so now we're in the 4s, and I only got one, and I think our list will be identical. I don't know, but I'm just guessing here. I'm going Billy Napier 4. What are your thoughts on that?
I've got him at 5.
Oh,
Mike, I think he's on the hot seat going into this year. I know that there's, Scott Strickland has kind of hinted at patience and that maybe he's not on the hot seat, but I think going into this year, when you look at the track record of Florida, you have to go back to 1936 to 1938 to find a head coach who has 3 consecutive losing seasons. And I'm not talking about it. It went over 2 different coaches like it did with Mullen and Billy Napier. The last time a Florida head coach who had 3 losing seasons was 1936 to 38 on his tenure. So, I mean, that's a long time ago. And the expectation is, we just talked about how Missouri was able to take a step forward after a couple losing seasons. We've seen it with Tennessee. I just think there's got to be some urgency here. This is Florida. This is one of the better jobs in college football. So while I think he deserves some patience at the start to rebuild and recruit, it's year 3. I think you've got to show some progress this season.
Ooh, well, first of all, I appreciate you, Carl. $10 breaking news: NCAA has entered the transfer portal. Yeah, the hell with the NCAA. But hey, I get it. Maybe I've just been blinded by all the hate these Florida fans send my way. But I don't know. I don't know what it is, Stephen. I'm thinking that Florida could be one of the more improved teams in the SEC. I know we all look at the schedule. The schedule's incredibly brutal, although I would argue that the first couple weeks, not so bad. Well,
there's a lot of swing games in there to start the season.
Right, that's probably the better way to say it. Miami at home, Sanford at home, Texas A&M at home, at Mississippi State, and UCF at home. I mean, if you can win all those, I mean, that's a big if, but if you can win those, you could have some momentum, I guess, before it all comes crashing down. But we saw strides. I realized they went in the tank at the end of the year, but it was maybe that's not even fair either, because they were improving, they were just losing. And again, you're right. This is Florida. This is supposed to be championships or bust. I mean, all they put up there is national championships and SEC champ. I mean, they don't celebrate 9-win seasons, 10-win seasons, and second place in the East. But I mean, they throw them a damn parade if they could get to a 10-win season next year, and rightfully so. So the standard has been lowered, unfortunately, for the Gators. It's not going to stay there for long. But I don't know. I don't know why I'm the only one. And hell, I'm putting him at a 4. So it's like, if he loses some of these games, I don't know if he makes it to the end of the season. But I don't have him on the hottest of hot seats. I got him at a 4, and I'm wrong all the time. But I feel like I'm right about this one.
I think there are a couple positives here for Florida, though. I think, to your point, that the Missouri game, if they just play a little bit better defense at the end, they could win that game. They were trading scores, obviously, with LSU, and LSU eventually just pulled away. So I feel like maybe the record is not indicative of like how close some of these games were last season, but that's also part of the problem. Is being close is fine, but you got to get over the hump, especially at a place like Florida. And even this year with that schedule, if they get to 7 wins, I know that's not the expectation of Florida, but considering that schedule, that would be a good sign going forward. And he could answer a lot of these doubts and get off the 5s and get into the 2s or 3s for next season. And I know some of the recruiting class fell apart this year, but they still got a couple guys on defense and Lagway coming in that could be high-end impact players. So the offense was not bad last year, and that's a credit to Napier. To get Graham Mertz to play the way he did after all the question marks in the preseason, that's a credit to him. Now they just got to fix their defense, I think, because that's really the big question for me coming into this year. So I guess I would subscribe to the theory that if I'm putting you on the hot seat for this year, you're probably going to be a 5 in the rating.
Right. So he's the only 4 I have. The only coach we haven't hit on, Sam Pittman. So that means you got him as a 4, right? Or do you have him as a 5?
I got him as a 5 too.
Oh, okay. So we both got him as a 5. So a lot of the same things. And man, do I love Sam Pittman. I hope he wins big. I hope he proves the doubters wrong, myself included. But I mean, I just feel like we have trended poorly the last 2 years, and really ever since Barry Odom and Kendall Browse left the staff, even though Travis Williams, I thought, did a very admirable job last year. I still think Barry Odom, and heck, we saw what he did at UNLV. I mean, he's a heck of a ball coach. So I don't know, Stephen. I'm worried about Arkansas. And again, I hope I'm wrong. But if we have 3 seasons of course, expectations are lowered, so maybe they can exceed them. But if they have 3 below average years, I don't know what we're doing here.
I think for you mentioned the word doubters there, and I think that's kind of interesting because that's kind of how Sam Pittman started at Arkansas, was doubters. Like, for the most part, he was an offensive line coach that was hired to be an SEC head coach, and everyone's kind of like, this guy's got no experience at being a head coach, and you're hiring him to be your head coach. And he just went out and proved the doubters wrong by, in a couple of years, winning 9 games. But I think the downside is the trend line. It's 9 wins to 7 to 4 4-12 in their last 16 SEC games. The positive side was at the start of last season, this was a pretty feisty Arkansas team. I mean, they were taking, LSU, the opponents in the first half, even though they were losing Alabama and Tuscaloosa, they were fighting hard. The difference was later in the season when they played Auburn and Missouri, they were completely blown out. So the trend line isn't good here for Sam Pittman, but I think if you're looking for optimism, it's that he's been doubted before and found a way to deliver. And now with maybe an improved staff going into this year, there's a chance that maybe Arkansas could just sneak up on the rest of the SEC, and maybe they aren't finishing 4-8 or 5-7. They're getting back into a bowl game.
Right. And can we swing it this way, Stephen, and say maybe we have corrected culture issues? Now, I've heard that they corrected it last offseason. So, and I don't know that there is big culture issues, but maybe perhaps there was. I love KJ. People get sick of me talking about KJ, but clearly not a fit for Dan Enos and whatever the hell he was trying to do. We got a lot more confidence in Bobby Petrino. We don't know who the quarterback's going to be, at least the starting quarterback yet. They added the transfer. They bring back Criswell, and they have the young guy Singleton. So I mean, whoever it is, you got to have confidence in Bobby Petrino to pick the right guy and pick the guy that'll fit the scheme and everything with that. So if we can upgrade there, offensive line coach was very unpopular, although he's got a good reputation. Let's say that they've upgraded an offensive line just for the sake of this argument. If they could get all that going in the right direction, could that be what sparks a surprising for a good season here for the Arkansas Razorbacks?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it feels like we're going to overlook somebody's preseason, and I don't know who it is yet, but that team is probably going to be picked in the bottom 4, and it could surprise. It could be Florida. To your optimism earlier, I think for Arkansas, and I've mentioned this before, so much of this is on quarterback play. I would feel so much better about this team if KJ Jefferson was the starting quarterback. Now, I have a ton of confidence that Bobby Petrino is going to make this offense better than it was last season. At least they will have a plan, and at least they will have a direction, unlike what they had under what they were doing with Dan Enos. So I like the staff. I think it's better than it was last season. Not sure on quarterback yet. Thinking back to last season, was Arkansas's win at Florida just one of the weirdest results of the season? It makes no sense when you think about how Florida had played up until that point, kind of being close as well. Arkansas just had the Mississippi State loss. You switch that result, and you think about how that could have changed some things. Like Billy Napier sitting here making a bowl game. Maybe Sam Pittman's not even the coach at Arkansas. So interesting how that result played out and what it could mean for this year.
Well, again, I hate to just keep going back to KJ, but that was, like you said, they had just fired Dan Enos, and that was the one game where KJ looked like the KJ that I
Yes.
know. You know what I mean? And they were dynamic on offense, and they put the ball in his hands. Rocket Sanders had a big game that day. They were trucking people. They went on the road and beat an SEC team. And defense scored a touchdown too. I mean, it was like a total team effort. That's Sam Pittman ball as I know and I like to see. But it's just we've just not seen it. I don't have any clue as to why. And I think that's what's disappointing. It's not like, and I hate all these people saying he's a joke, he sucks, blah, blah. I mean, he's won 9 games at Arkansas, not that long ago. So good luck. Half these coaches that we just talked about probably couldn't have done that. So again, he's not awful, but it has not worked. I don't know why.
Does the improvement of the Arkansas defense last year under Travis Williams give you even more optimism that group could improve this year, and also hiring Petrino is the right solution offensively? Like, it feels like, I know the staff had to get a reboot with the Enos thing, but it feels like I think maybe we should have a little bit of trust in Pittman that he's got the right guys around him now.
Yeah, and one thing that gets often overlooked, Stephen, and I try to highlight it as much as I can, Arkansas has done as good a job as anybody as bringing in transfers and getting them to perform at a much higher level than they were at their previous schools.
Absolutely.
And it's defensive line, it's receiver, it's it's all across the board. Linebacker, they have taken guys, and not just taken them, but like gotten them to the NFL, and they have done this annually under Sam Pittman. So I don't know. Can they do that again? I have full confidence that they can. And there's probably a handful to 10 players that the casual SEC fan has no idea who they are, that is going to be key contributors for the Arkansas Razorbacks via guys they've added via the portal this offseason.
Landon Jackson. I know most SEC fans probably know Landon Jackson, but I don't think the rest of the country knows how good he is. And he's probably going to be one of those guys who pop up on preseason All-America lists, and there's going to be a lot of people surprised and realize how good he's been for Arkansas and how much better he got last season. So I think maybe that would be the optimism from Arkansas for me, is you got an improved staff, and you've got a staff that can get the most out of the roster now, especially offensively with Petrino in there, and you get continued growth from guys like a Landon Jackson and some of the other transfers that you brought in the last couple of years too.
Now, Stephen, last thing before we hop off here, I did ask you too to come up with any coordinators that are just basically the only thing I wanted from you, Stephen, is coordinators that are scorching hot seat here potentially, and I struggled to come up with it because there's been a lot of coordinator turnovers, so it's kind of hard to get scorching hot. But I do have a couple here. I'm curious to hear your list and see if there's any of the same guys on it.
Man, I had a hard time coming up with guys who were just like scorching hot in terms of like coordinator hot seat, because like you mentioned, it has been so much turnover here, and including the head coaching changes at Alabama, because it felt like Tommy Rees was going to be easy to pencil in as a 5 a few weeks ago. I'll throw out a couple names here. I don't know, maybe they're scorching hot, but I would say, I think fair to wonder, like Corey Batoon, the new defensive coordinator at Missouri. Not scorching hot, but also kind of in the same sense of like pressure for this year. You're inheriting a defense that was one of the best in the country last year. And, I think it's a solid hire, but also I think, it's one of those ones that I think we have to trust Eli Drinkowitz, because it's not the big name hire. What if he bombs in year one and Missouri's defense goes back down to the bottom of the SEC? What about someone like Tim Banks at Tennessee? The defense has gotten better, but at the same time, I think there's another step that they need to take to catch Georgia. So I've got a few more, but I'll stop there. I'll see if you agree with me on either one of those.
I have Tim Banks, and I like Tim Banks, and I think he's done a fine job. And we have seen, I particularly like Tennessee, how they defend the run and tackles for loss. Those are critical stats when you're teamed up against with a Josh Heupel offense, because you're just never going to be have a shutdown defense. You're just not, because you're on the field. It's all about snaps. How many snaps are you on the field? And with Tennessee going as fast as they want to go, again, you're just never going to be elite, but you can't be getting killed either. You can't be giving up 60 plus points in a damn conference game that could have won you went to the college football playoff. So we can't have that. I don't think Tim Banks should be fired by any means, but if the defense takes a step back, I think it's fair to start that conversation.
To your point on Tim Banks, I think the biggest thing is they just need to find ways to get the ball back to the offense. It doesn't have to be a shutdown group. Doesn't matter what the stats says. Getting timely stops in the red zone, forcing turnovers and things like that. So the yards per play, the scoring defense might be a little high, but it's about those timely stops. But in a very broad sense, I think the question is, can this defense get to another level? I think some of that's been personnel. I think now you're getting into year, 4 there at Tennessee. I think it's important to show some another step forward by that defense for Tim Banks.
Yeah. Now, the one guy that I was curious you were going to say, Stephen, Austin Armstrong, Florida defensive coordinator. And maybe it's not fair. He's only been there 1 year, but I'm looking for Florida to take a step up they have to on defense. Otherwise, Billy Napier's not going to survive. I think he kind of went out on a limb. And when he made this hire, and Nick Saban had just hired this guy to be linebackers coach. So clearly, sharp mind, but a very young guy. And they were just awful on defense last year. And if they're awful again, not only is Armstrong gone, Napier's probably gone too. So I'm putting a lot of pressure on him to it. And again, they don't have to be elite, but they just can't be god awful like they were at times last year.
33.6 points a game allowed in the SEC last year for Florida. That's the highest mark. I went back. I was able to go back to 2009 to 2003. That's the highest mark in SEC games that a Florida defense has allowed in terms of points. So to your point, I think Austin Armstrong squarely on the hot seat, and maybe no other factor will tell us that than the fact they brought in Ron Roberts to sort of be the co-DC, maybe the head coach of the defense. So Austin Armstrong is squarely on my X factor hot seat conversation for coordinators, because if that defense is better, there's a good chance that Florida is getting to 6-7 victories. If not, Billy Napier is probably going to be looking for new employment somewhere else next year.
And then the other one, like you said, Steven, this was tough to come up with, but I'm genuinely surprised this guy got brought back. I didn't know if he would or not. Clayton White, defensive coordinator for South Carolina. Some of that's injuries, but they have been rough, particularly defending the run in the SEC. And I don't know. I'm not seeing a lot from Clayton White. I believe it was 2 years ago. Maybe they led the SEC in turnovers. Maybe that's what you got to be at South Carolina, because you're not going to have, the elite defensive players of Georgia and Alabama. So you got to get creative. But kind of surprised that Clayton White comes back, and I have to assume they got to get a lot better if he's going to come back.
Yeah, I have him on my list too. I also have Dow Loggins, because I think in a very broad sense, like we've talked about with South Carolina, it does feel like a very critical year for this program. But on Clayton White, I was surprised he was brought back, because it felt like several times during the year, Shane Beamer was extremely frustrated with his defense in the halftime interviews or at the end of the game, not afraid to show that. And I kind of thought that, hey, maybe a good time to change coordinator. So he was on my list too. I'll throw out a few guys here that I don't think they're necessarily in the hot seat, but this is also, it's one of those pressure years, because if you're Pete Golding at Ole Miss, you're brought in to make this defense better, and you just signed the great class of transfers from the portal. So there's pressure to get this group better. It's not necessarily hot seat driven. Same thing with Bobby Petrino. Sam Pittman's employment probably depends on Bobby Petrino this year. So he's not on the hot seat, but I think it's fair to say he's got a lot of pressure on him this year too.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, so that's all the coordinators I got. But again, it's kind of tough. We're stretching a little bit here to find coordinators that need to be gone. But Steven, 1 week, 2 weeks into the season, it's going to be easy to identify at least the ones the fans are upset with and want to change at. And it's usually the offensive coordinator who ain't running the damn ball. You know what?
Yeah, Mike Bobo after the
game. All right, Steven. So, hey, we went pretty long on this one. Do you got any thoughts here before we wrap up?
Man, looking forward to signing day coming up to see what happens there. Obviously, as we've seen this off season this month, college football is not going to stop. So looking forward to seeing what other chaos is upon us in the next couple days here.
Yeah, hopefully, there's no more coaching changes. Boston College just opened up. So, man, this is going to be wild. I mean, how are they even going to sign players, Steven, if they don't have a head coach? I guess they'll have to do it with an interim, but hopefully their class is put together. But I got to imagine all those guys are probably entering the portal right now. So, man, just a wild, wild time. We got states suing the NCAA. I mean, who knows if we'll have an NCAA in the months to come. But this is just uncharted waters here.
Not to mention it's uncharted waters, but it's also that way for the 2024 college football season, because I guess some behind the scenes work. I was doing some background work on our Athlon Sports College Football magazine last couple weeks, and you start to realize how much different the season is going to be, because there's the 12-team playoff, there's all these conference changes, the portal, even the coaches. I mean, you put together a list of top 10 coaches in college football, and without Harbaugh, without Nick Saban, and you see how many coaching changes there could be. I think almost 30 by the time we get done with this. Man, it's been a crazy offseason, and I don't know that we're done yet to unprecedented, uncharted waters might not be, who knows? Florida State might leave the ACC soon. Who knows?
But hey, I would say this, Stephen. Last thing I got, but yeah, it's wild times, stability, all these things. But all that's gonna do, in my mind, and maybe I'm wrong, but I fell in love with football, college football specifically, when it was unpredictable. And we had teams like South Florida, believe it or not, was like number 2 in the country at one point in time.
It was the Matt Grothy era of South Florida, right?
So I think that's what we're going to get to here with unpredictability. It ain't going to just be Alabama and Georgia and Clemson like it was for seemingly 10 years in a row, and Ohio State. I mean, this is going to allow Ole Miss, Missouri to make these runs to the college football playoff. There's going to be other teams emerging, Tennessee, Texas, Oklahoma, on and on and on. I mean, this is going to open it to where I think we're going to not have dominant teams year in, year out. I think it's going to come in waves, and I think that's a lot more fun for us fans because you just never know. You're riding high right now, Ole Miss, Missouri. You may not in 2 or 3 years. It may be South Carolina, Kentucky, or just insert any school. And I think that makes it fun.
I think it's going to be a lot more unpredictable. I do think Georgia is set up for some dominance, but Georgia and Ohio State are probably as positioned as anybody to sort of dominate 2024 and throw in Oregon too. But I think to your point, I think just more uncertainty, more year to year. There's like a vacuum at the top of there's no longer, you don't start your list of favorites with Alabama and Georgia anymore. It's Georgia and then a bunch of questions. So there's a void, but there's also opportunity for teams like Ole Miss and Missouri, to your point.
Right. All right, Steve, before we sign off, tell everybody, how can they follow you? How can they find your work?
You can follow me on Twitter at AthlonSteven. You can also check out my work over on Facebook and Instagram at Stephen L. CFB and on YouTube at AllCFB365.
All right, Stephen, I appreciate you. As always, I appreciate each and every one of you for hanging out, especially those on the live show and those that gave donations. That really does help the show. We're just truly independent. There's no big company here, obviously, behind this operation. So we do appreciate each and every one of you. Like and subscribe, and please spread the word on the show. And we will catch you on the next one.